Hello. Hello. Yeah, that's better. Oh, yeah, that's better. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to YouTube CS Tech Talks for week 5. Week 5. Damn. That's crazy. Yeah, thank you very much to everyone who attended Hackathon. It was very well attended. We had over 190 tickets sold. Some awesome prizes. If you haven't seen the winners of Hackathon and all the other prize winners, have a look on our GitHub. They'll be uploaded soon. Also on our website under the Showcase tab. Some really exciting projects there. Definitely worth checking out. Coming up soon, Tech Talk as usual next week. Hopefully we should have Elias, more about CSS and some UI design. And in week 7 we'll have HFN. So HFN tickets have been released. Check out Instagram for the Humanitics link. Should also be on Discord soon. And up on Facebook as well. Those are the main things for the moment. This week we have Isaac with CSS Crimes. I'm very intrigued to see what crimes you will commit. So make Isaac welcome.
So while Elias might be speaking next week about actual stuff that you might want to put into production, I'm just going to put a forewarner that most of this stuff you probably don't want to ever touch in serious code. This is for the fun of using a toolset with limited tools to do things that you may not expect to begin with. So here's all my slides. You can see all of them currently. This is the entire talk. We're going to format them with a live demo, so may the gods be with me as we slowly code. So the idea is, this is just a style tag. So it's a style content editable, which means I can edit this and it will update on the page. So if I start by, say, changing the H1s to be font size 10M, we now have a title. I might just zoom out slightly and change the mic. Hopefully everyone can hear me while I'm sitting down. It's much easier to code with 2 hands. So I'm just going to zoom out slightly, and now we have our first bit of CSS that we're going to add to our page. But the idea is that I'm going to continue to edit this page, and we'll see more and more hacks that are going to come along. So this very basic stuff, I have a basic reset thing that sets this width of this sidebar in case I needed to change it. The focus of any elements in the outline, just removing them. I'm going to set some basic things to the body, not so much to worry. In our style tags, I've just made sure that you can actually see them, so you need to make sure that they're display block, otherwise they're not going to be visible. Also make sure that you have the content editable so that you can edit them.
Is it meant to be content editable or content editable?
Well, this is CSS, so it doesn't matter either way. But in the HTML, it's definitely content editable. I put a little border around it and made it look a bit nice, but that's not really interesting. I've also made sure that it takes up this side here and won't move around. That way, because sometimes you can make this just go invisible, and then you have no way to access the CSS from the HTML anymore, and I have to restart this talk from scratch. So this is a really good thing, just to have it stay here and be scrollable, so I don't lose any of the stuff that we typed today. However, this no longer looks, well, it doesn't start to look how I want it, so I'm going to change the slides here, and we're going to start by maybe changing their width, height, and position. I have pre-coded some of this stuff, so I might be copying and pasting, because a live demo, whilst it's fun, I do trust that I'm not that good of a coder at times. So, firstly, we're going to change the width, so it's nice and wide, and set the height of each slide to be the full size, and the position relative. We now have the first problem that comes to every person who does CSS, how to center an element. This H1 is not centered, it's not vertically or horizontally. Thankfully, these days we have a few tricks up our sleeves. These aren't really the hacks that I'm interested in, but for the sake of actually making this look somewhat presentable, we're going to change the display of this item, its flex wrap, and we're going to align the items, this one here, and justify content. So this will center it. The align content will actually come in handy later. It's a special tool we'll use later on. But this is basically just centering our slides. We're now getting into something which could be passably put off as a slide deck. However, I'm going to do a few other things just to make this, I guess, look a bit more like a slide deck. The first thing that we can do is start by adding page numbers. So, for the first slide, we want to start our slides at page 0. So for the first slide in our deck, we're going to set a counter. And this is a feature of CSS that you may not know about, but we're going to counter reset, and we'll call this page, I'll call it slide for easiness. And then on each slide, we're going to add something after it, which is going to be this page number. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to increment the slide. We're going to set that to be the content. So we have, maybe we'll set it to be slide. And then we're going to add our counter, which is the slide. Now it's at the side. This is probably not what we want. We probably want it down at the bottom, so let's change that too. What's the easiest way? I'm going to do position absolute. Center is probably also not what we want, so let's put it at the bottom. And hey presto, we have a slide count. So that was the very basics. I'm going to also change its size. I like making things look at least a little bit nice. So 1M, oh, that's about the same size. Let's make it slightly larger. And now we have our slide counter. So, we have slides, they add up, we didn't have to do that, all automatic, no HTML anywhere inside to add all of those. Okay, so now let's go on to the next page, and this is what I will cover. So, first I'm going to cover state and checkboxes. So, with JavaScript and like when you're building an application, you want to be able to store user input. We can also do this in CSS, so why use JavaScript? Also, you might know JavaScript languages, they're very useful. Like, if you've ever heard of Turing completeness, you want to have loops, you want to have recursion. Again, CSS, we have recursion. Why are we worrying about JavaScript? In the end, we're going to make a binary calculator, something that might help introductory CS students add binary numbers together, maybe even subtract them if we have time. So that's going to be our aim. But first, of course, this slide isn't looking so good. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger and go down here. Change the titles to go be big and be at the top, because titles should be at the top of the page. And also, actually, we'll go to the next slide. So, this is a bit misleading. Currently, I have a checkbox and a label, but like all good CSS, I have a nest of divs behind there, and these aren't being shown. So let's actually start showing all our divs, so it's nice and clear what's actually going on in the background. So, firstly, we can set a border, black, and hey, there's actually only one div on this page. We might make it slightly nicer as well, so we might add some padding. It's probably good to add a margin to it as well, so it doesn't run into other elements when we get them. 1M. What else? I'm going to set the minimum width to be 5ems. This will just help us later on. 5em. And there's some other properties that I'm going to do about the overflow and position that will help us, but aren't super important. So I'll just do that. They're just going to make everything look nice if we accidentally end up making stuff too big for our div, which will happen in the end when we see the later demos. There's also something else that we want. So this div is good, but it doesn't tell us what classes or ID it has. So we're going to add something to it. Hopefully we can add it to before the div, and we'll set its position to be absolute. Position absolute, and I might add some content to this just so we can see what I'm doing. 3, 4. Hi. So currently, that's not really where we want it, so let's change that a little bit. So we might put it at the top of our div. Top, negative 1.1 ems, let's say. We might also put it at the very side, so it doesn't have that padding like there. I'm also going to make it a little bit smaller, because this is not our main content, so our font size can be maybe... Can everyone read that, or should I make it slightly bigger?
Read it.
Everyone visible up the back? Lovely, I'll leave it at that. It'll leave enough room for later. And I'm also going to do some no wrap for our text wrap, just in case we, again, get stuff that is too big. So text wrap, it's hard to code without auto-completion, no wrap. Lovely, I think that's about it. I'm also going to make our div look a little bit nicer, and that actually we'll do that later. So this is all good, but this doesn't tell us what this div is, so I'm going to get rid of that content that we just spent so long making. And if our div and this div is actually called the checkbox demo, and again we're changing the content before it. We're going to just 1, 2, 3, 4 content, and set this to be div hashtag checkbox demo. And if we close that off, we can now see this will make it a bit nicer when we're dealing with all these divs. One div isn't so bad, but this is it. Okay, so this is just a normal checkbox, nothing so interesting so far. One thing that we can do is, so checkbox 1, when it is checked, we're going to add some outline to it. Line, say 3 pixels solid. Anyone have a favorite color?
Purple.
Purple. Let's see if that's a default color. Oh, thank you. Please correct me if I make mistakes. Hey, there's a bit of an outline. Let's make that a bit more obvious. Yay! Outline when we click the button. However, there's something I want to note. We can also click the label, and the button is clicked. This will be important later, so try not to forget. So, one thing that we can do is we can change what happens to this div depending on what happens to this label. So, we used to have to make sure that the checkbox was before the div, because CSS selectors were a bit weird, but we actually have a better way now. So if div has a checked element, we can change it. So we might start with the background being light grey. And now, if I can actually select everything, we now have something that kind of looks like a button. There's still a few problems. We have this checkbox, which looks a little bit ugly for a button. And if we click up here, it doesn't work only on the checkbox and the label. So let's fix those two issues now. The first thing to do with the button is we can just set inputs, and I'll even be very specific and say our checkboxes display none. Hey, we've hidden it, but it still works as a button. But again, remember that the div has some padding, so we're going to get rid of that and replace this with stuff on our label. So I'm actually going to copy and paste this, because making our label look nice isn't so important. But we can add our padding on the label. So now all of this is padding on margin on the label, and we have a button. This is state. We can click it, and we can do things about it just like we saw the state of it. So, making sure I've done all that, I'm going to go to the next slide. We're going to combine these. So, first thing first, I'm going to make these divs have names. So I'm going to copy and paste all those names. This is just like the div that we did before. We now have names, and they look slightly nicer. So we have a checkbox A that we can click because it has a checkbox hidden inside of it, a checkbox B, and these things aren't buttons. To make that a little bit more clear, anything, a div that has a button inside of it, so we'll do it down here, and has an input, we're now going to be able to change this. And let's put maybe a box shadow around it, and 3 pixels, 3 pixels, light grey again. So now all our buttons have backgrounds. It might also be good to only show this on hover, just so it's less scary, but you could do this in different ways if you want to style it differently. I'm not a design person, but now we've made our buttons clear that they're buttons and these ones are not buttons. Okay. So moving back to our checkboxes, we want to make such that A and B runs when both of them are on, A or B is an OR, and A XOR B does exclusive OR. So firstly, let's actually define what on and off is. So div, after the input, the label, we're going to add 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to add something like on should be, say, oh, sorry, if it's just an ordinary label, we're going to have 0, but this isn't working. We need to also set what happens when the input is checked. Control V, this is checked. We can set this to be 1. And hey presto, we have buttons that work with input changing the text. I'm just going to scroll down slightly so we have a bit more space. Now let's add the labels for this. So to begin with, we can do div label. Oh, thank you. Label. And remember, these ones don't have checkboxes, so I'm going to select them if they're the first child. This means we won't select any of the labels from the first 2 boxes up here. We'll only select the ones on the bottom here because they have no checkbox, so the labels are the first child in there. Firstly, we might want to set this to be after again, and we're going to set the content to be 0 by default. That's a good default for a lot of these. Even if it doesn't correspond to this, we're going to fix it up now. So, if div of checkbox A has a checked element, so this is how we could test for just one of them, but there's a nice syntax in CSS called the tilde. This looks for if the next item is following. So it's going to select anything that has a div checkbox A that has a checked element, and then it has to be followed by a div checkbox B that also has the checked element, and then we're going to get this selector here. So putting this here, we're going to set, here we're actually just selecting this checkbox still. So again, we're going to want to be then followed by that character there. And then we want the div A and B, and we're doing the label and wiggle after. And I might make this look just slightly nicer by putting this on the next line. And we can set the content equal to 1. So now we have a functioning AND gate, except, what have I stuffed up here? Oh. Yeah, so now we have a functioning AND gate for the A and B. Hey, look, that's one gate, we can do the rest. So I'm going to copy and paste this because they're very similar, all of these. So this time, instead of like that, we can use, oops, sorry, not the plus, the comma to select if this occurs or this occurs. But the problem is, CSS is a bit silly, and it's only going to select this one or this one. There's no brackets that we can do to select the or there used to be no brackets. We can now, if we do something that looks like nesting it in braces here. So I'm just going to pad this so it looks a bit more reasonable. And we'll get rid of this one. So now when it's in here, we use that new ampersand symbol that we've been seeing a little bit of. And hopefully, if we change this to A or B, we get an OR gate. There we go. Now, finally, we get to also do an XOR. So an XOR is just kind of like an OR gate. So we're going to copy this one and change it to XOR. So now we're kind of getting an XOR, but we need this to be off. So, hey presto, we can copy this one from above and change it to be 0 when both of them are on. And hey look, binary gates in CSS. Okay, so, any questions about this so far? Do note that we can't, like, change the checkbox later on. So we can't make checkboxes checked, but we can use any of the checkboxes and just propagate the changes through. So, yeah. First step, all done. Next, we're going to do recursion. So, again, like last time, I'm going to add the labels to these divs because they make things look a little bit nicer. So we have A, B, A, B. Now this is really easy to copy and paste. All you do is like copy the div A, div B, and once you got that block, you can just keep copying and pasting. If you had to say this is div 1, div 2, div 3, div 4, you have to edit all those numbers. We don't want that. We just want some alternating thing that we can go off. Now, here's the trick. We're going to set a counter, or, well, technically, in this case, a variable on each of these divs. So, first, I'm going to set the base case. So if the slide has a recursion block, we're then going to set the base case. So I is going to be our recursive variable, and we'll set it to be 0 to begin with. We then want to, I'll actually, just to make things look a little bit nicer, recursion after, and we'll just print out so this is a common pitfall in CSS. You might think that this will print out the variable I, but variable I is a number, not a string. There is a way to get around this, and it's a little bit crudgy, so please excuse that this looks a bit ugly. We're first going to set a counter to be the value of I, because counters can be converted to strings. So counter reset, counter I, and then for now I'll just do var I. This might bite me in later, but we'll see. And then we can do something like I equals, and then counter, I'm just calling this counter I to distinguish it from the normal variable I. And hey look, we now have the state printed as well. So this is like, we can actually debug, we can see what's happening here. Now, you might be tempted to say, in a recursion div, why don't we just let I be equal to 1 plus itself? Var I plus 1. But you might notice it does nothing. Well, firstly, we haven't actually done anything, because this bar is just like the 1 plus 1 plus. We need to calculate that first. So even if this did do something, we need to add in this here. But no, still doesn't do anything. And this is because CSS, for this recursion element, I could refer to the I of its parent, or it could refer to the I of itself. It can't tell the difference between it. Really, we want this one to be the I of the parent, and this one to be its own I. But because it can't tell the difference, it just does nothing. You can't have loops within a single equation. You might notice that we have AB here. So if you've ever played with C macros a little bit, whilst you can't refer to a variable itself, why don't have a cycle of two things that just alternate? So we'll start with our base case. Again, we also have to have that. So we're going to have B equal to -1 here. And I'm also going to print out all of these variables at once to make it a bit more clear what's happening. Counter B, and I probably should have put counter A before I put counter B. That would probably make more sense. So, and I'll clean this up in a second to make it a little bit more readable, but there's not much you can do about this. It is just a little bit ugly sometimes. Shift enter 1, 2, 3, 4, and then up, shift enter 1, 2, 3, 4. So hopefully we can start seeing all of those. We also need to reset these counters so that they look like they're in the right place. So we're going to have counter A is equal to calc var A, and counter B is equal to calc var B. And A isn't defined here, so we might even set a base case for A, but I'm going to get rid of this in a second. hopefully we should see that these are updating, so I'm just going to be careful of YB. Or why might this not be working? This is why I have code that I can copy and paste in the worst case example. I'm going to be copying something for just 1 second. Yeah. V. That was also not what I wanted.
Is it your dot recursion reference?
No, so each of these have dot recursion A and dot recursion on them. Let me just, oh, and I haven't set the content. So give me 1 second. Worst comes to worst, I just copy and paste a bunch more code, but I'd like to keep it somewhat like what we have so far. This isn't a great sign. All right.
That's the content is a variable, and then the counter.
Where?
The one you just pasted, I think you're saying that variables can't go straight to the.
Ooh. Oh yes. Okay. No. That shouldn't be needed because we have. Oh. Give me 1 second. Alright, if this doesn't work, I'm just going to copy a bunch of code, so do forgive me. Hey, there we go. It's working, but we're not getting the values again. We'll fix that up in a little bit. So, the idea is that we also want to set each of the variables for each of these recursive blocks. So, recursion...
Closing brace after the dot recursion display in my block.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Right, so for our recursion, we're going to split this up into 2 parts. So recursion A is going to take the variable A and set it to bar B plus 1. And recursion B, so we can see that now A has increased from whatever B is plus 1. But B hasn't increased, so if we start this at -1, A is always going to be 0 because it's just 1 plus B. However, if we can also set recursion B, and you'll have no idea of what this is going to be, B is going to be bar A plus 1. And hopefully, we can see that B every second time increases by 2, and A every second time increases by 2. So, we just need to set I to be the right variable here. So, I, in this case, will be set to bar A, and I seems to be working in some cases, and copying that, I can be set to B, and we might see that I goes from 0, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to comment out the rest of those, because really I is the one that we care about now. But again, we're doing this kind of mutual recursion, because you can't recurse over a single variable, but now we have something to recurse over. I'll double check that I'm not missing anything else here. Cool. So this brings us to enough information that we can make a binary adder. I'm going to do something that I kind of cheated about. I hid this earlier on. So I'm going to comment this out. Or actually, I'm not going to comment this out because it will comment that out before I close the brace. I'm going to delete it. That wasn't as deadly as I thought, but that's most likely because I have it still here as hidden. Because I was very scared of that appearing where we didn't want it to. Okay, so this is going to be our adder, and this is all the HTML that's there. Let me add some more divs that should be existing in here. So I'm going to... You can see that we have, I might try to get, so we have our first number that's leaking over the previous slide. We have our second number, and we have our output. Our aim is that we can add 2 numbers together. Currently, our recursion looks a little bit ugly, so I'm going to get rid of the content, but note that I is always still there. So don't, like, the I is always going to actually be there. It just makes this fit into one slide. I also have some extra elements that I'll talk about in a little bit. So, I'm just going to pad this out a little bit. So, one thing that we want to do is we want to affect each of these boxes. I've called So we have our first number and second number, and also our output. These all have the number div, so I might put number here. And if we did just say color or background, purple was your favorite color, Will?
Yep.
CSS.
There we go. So these are all our numbers. I just wanted to make sure those elements are clear. I'm not going to keep the purple background. Okay. So, the first thing we might want to do is make sure that they all have a nice height, but that doesn't look so nice right now. So, these are the outside boxes. So you can notice that these are the only ones that have the height. I'm also going to make them a flex basis 100, which just means that they're going to spend 100% of the screen. So we have 3 in a row, like we're adding up numbers old high school style. And I'm going to do something magical that I'll explain in a second. But we're going to set a transform, and we're going to translate it 0. We're just going to leave it where it is. Why do we need to do that? I'll explain in a second, but there is purpose to this madness. So, the next thing to do, oh, sorry about that, is to change the position of all these bits. They can be selected by a div within a div. Oh, not a div. So, a div within a div, and we're going to now select them. So, what are some things that we might want to do on this? Well, we don't want them nested within each other. We need to position themselves. So if I do something like position fixed, hey, they're no longer so much nested between them. And there's a reason we have this transform here. So if I comment out this transform, this tells us where we're fixed to. Currently, they're moving up to the first slide that we can't see anymore. So we need to say, no, actually be relative to this element here. We might also do some other things to make this look slightly nicer. So what's some examples? We can set their width to be 5em, their height to be 5em. Again, they're looking a bit like boxes all stacked up there, so let's change the top to be 0. So now they're all in a line, but we need to move them across. But if we did say left 1em, that moves all of them left 1em. We want to space them. Remember, we have I. So we're going to calc 1em and then times, and I'm going to be careful here. I will explain why the nested brackets, and we might make this big enough that we can see it. 7, in fact, makes us have really nice boxes. So this one's shifting each over by the value of I. Now, one thing to note is I have these extra brackets around this. I'll open a comment here. So remember that I has been set to a bunch of pluses, really. They've been alternating. So this is actually, if you looked at the value of I, it's going to be like this. If we substitute it without the brackets here, this is 7em times 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. So make sure you put brackets around this, because otherwise it inserts this expression first without doing any calculations. You can also put a calc there, but it's not necessary. The brackets are enough. But do make sure you put that in, because that's a cause of many bugs in the CSS Hackers Handbook. Okay, so once we have them spaced apart, we might also, I think that's about it that we need so far. Cool. So here I have, just like on the side, we have a CSS styles element. I made another one. So this sets on the global scope 2 variables, number 1 and number 2. If we wanted to here, we could set at, after, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The content of this to be, say, we're going to have to do the weird counter thing again. Counter, reset, I'm just going to call this n, and we're going to set it to var n1, our first number, and if we set n to be counter n, hey, we get our first number, and whatever we change this to, it's going to update in live time. That's how we can get like better input than just text boxes. Technically, you can just do this with all the checkbox wizardry, I don't have enough time to live demo that here. But we'll get rid of that just to show what those two variables do. This is also a div with a thing inside. I think I have, I don't have a little name for it, but it's called operation. This is going to toggle between plus and minus if we have enough time to implement that. So, the idea is that we're going to have, within the first number, the value that we want to display is n1, and the value of n2, of number 2 is going to be n2. I might change that around just to make it look a little bit nicer. And now we're going to display this in our div after. So this is in each of our boxes. We're going to display a value. So, counter reset, and we'll call this result, or maybe just R, and this is going to be, you can put whatever you want in here, but we're going to just put, for now, var n1. And we'll make this look a little bit nicer, so content, counter R. So we're going to just get n1, same as what we had before. I'm just going to do a little bit to center these things. Again, half of the challenge of CSS is centering things. So we get our 17s nice and centered. This took me longer than I'd like to admit. Right. But instead of just printing out the value of n1, we want to find the digit of each. So I'm going to set our result, which is what we're going to actually display. So if I set this here to be 1, this is all going to be 1. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start with, actually let's set it to be I, the variable I. I don't know what other I they might be talking about. Let me just make sure that that's all working. We might just want to calc that, sorry. Because I is a plus again, so when we're just setting it, we need to have a calc. I might even put that over here so we don't get too bogged down in our notation. So if we put the calc on this side, we can leave I right here. There we go. So now we're going to say, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This one's a little bit ugly. So we're going to divide by the power of 2 to the 7 minus var I. And remember that we need to add extra brackets around this. And I'm going to start with n1. Lovely. Thank you everyone doing the live coding for me. So here we're just dividing and remembering that CSS may not round properly, so I'm also going to add a round down command. Who knew that that existed? With a 1 at the end, because 1 is the interval range, so we want to round down to the nearest integer. This gives us our value of n1. So if I set this to be 8, it's going to just divide it by 8 and round down. If you've seen this before, you might see where this is going, because if we mod this by 2, which CSS actually has a mod command, mod all of this by 2, and this is a bit of maths that I'm not so worried about, we now represent our first number in binary. Fantastic. So now we're going to do a similar thing, but instead of using n1 as our value, if I set this to be value, which we set to be n1 in our first number and n2 in our second number, hey look, we get each of these to be the number that they're representing. We now have a display working for our two numbers, we just need the output to work. So, first thing I'm going to do is hashtag output, and we're going to set this the value. So we just need to figure out what the value is, and we're pretty much done. So this can be, say, we don't even need a calc here, because this is all self-contained, though I will put some brackets around it here. So, if we set the value to be, say, var n1 plus var n2, we now have the sum of these two numbers. Let's make it a bit more interesting. And we have a calculator that can do sums in binary. Like, pretty much for free with CSS. Now let's make it toggle between addition and subtraction. So, firstly, I'm going to make this button, which I'm going to call the operation, look a little bit nicer. So, our operation input followed by a label after. So before we were setting all these inputs to be equal 0 when they started. We can set this to be content plus to begin with. So we have a plus button. Hopefully we will be able to change it to a negative sign by changing what happens when our input is checked minus. So we just have a button. I'm not changing any of the output. We might also set the background to be white when we have an input checked, just to make it look a little bit cleaner. Operation has checked background white. So now we have a button that can toggle between plus and minus. We now just need to toggle between what our actual states are. But we're just changing this. So for our last bit, putting it all together, if operation has a checked box, and then we are followed at some point by our output, we want to set the value to be var n1, if I actually type correctly, minus var n2. So now, hopefully, in the moment of truth, we should get 5. And we get 5! I'm going to leave this adder right here. There are some nicer things I wanted to do about getting multiplication working, about getting decimals and negatives working. Like this kind of handles negatives. If you were to put like 10 here, you're going to get 2's complement here. So it's like what you'd expect from a computer. But yeah, you can make it a little bit nicer and you can show negative signs. There's some tricks about using different counter styles. So here we've just used the basic counters, but you can have counters that like repeat symbols numbers of times, change a lot of the display from that. So there is more to it, but I'm going to leave this here as a little demo project of what you can do with just CSS. So as a quick recap, we made our styles editable to have access to variables. We were able to have checkboxes and divs so we can have state that we can toggle. We had recursion so that we can position everything correctly and also get its right position for when we need the bit of which one it is, which is really hard to do by tags, by the way. If you're trying to do this labeling by tags, you then also have to have that many CSS statements to get the right bit in the right place. And then lastly, we used our variables and a bit of manipulation there to actually do some calculation and make a nice little demo project. If you are interested in more information, these slides with the completed CSS are available on my GitHub. I also have a pure CSS graphing calculator, which is a functional graphing calculator. I might even put on smooth transitions, where you can change whatever thing you want here. So we might change this to cos, not scos. And you can change this to be whatever function you like. The list of supported functions is below. Again, entirely made out of CSS. You can change the limits of the function, if I actually put it in right, and everything will shift nicely and look lovely. So feel free to have a play around with that. I have a full description of all the curse things behind that as well. But mostly, they're no different from this. So feel free to just have a look at these slides and they should have everything. Thank you all for listening. Any questions?
How long did it take you to figure this out?
So I think I started working on these slides Monday evening. So once you actually know a lot of these tricks, they actually become fairly easy to use. You kind of just have a bag of tools that you end up piecing together. The hardest bit really was centering some of those numbers. I'm not joking, that is an absolute pain in CSS. I'm much happier doing like curse things around positioning than really centering something.
So say you are using all these fun little tricks with CSS in combination with another language, would you be able to pass like values that like the checkbox thing along to maybe a JavaScript that's running in the background? Like, are the bells passable?
I think I didn't get my point clearly across, because really you should not need JavaScript at all anymore. But if you do need to use JavaScript at any point, yeah, checkboxes and CSS variables and even CSS counters are all accessible and able to be set from JavaScript as well. So I don't know, if you really want, maybe the checkbox hacks actually is used in some places, especially when they want to run with no JavaScript for just like showing a menu or something. But overall, yeah, please don't use any of this in production code. It is definitely not worthy.
Oh,
So you were storing a bunch of bits in divs. Is there a way you could do it with n bits rather than a fixed number of bits ahead of time? Know what I'm asking?
Sadly, this is probably the biggest problem with CSS. We can only triple the number of elements originally on the page. So we can add before and we can add after, but they cannot have nested befores and afters, and there's no other pseudo elements that are available on most tags, and none that you can repeat recursively. On my graphing calculator here, I triple the number of points, and it's actually a speed increase. If you just have this many divs, it's really slow to run. The delay here, if I turn this down to 0, and I just start shifting this to, say, 15, it's instantaneous. Like, it's not doing any calculation. If this was all divs, it does run a bit slower. So it does help to triple things, but I can't just infinitely produce. There's still like 80 divs all nested here, which is the worst part, and I really wish that they do allow this in some future extension. Any other questions at all?
Is CSS 3
Turing complete if you allow the user to touch on things and you allow infinite HTML elements to start with. So, not really. I wish it was, but yeah, really that HTML limit does affect all of it. Any other questions? Well, oh, yep.
So at some point, I imagine the thought to do this entered your mind. What was the immediate preceding thought? How did we get here, Isaac?
So Faith can actually attest to this one. I was sitting on the ferry heading home, and the graphing calculator was like the big moment of force that made me like do this. And it was like, wait, this might be possible in CSS. I'm gonna spend an hour this afternoon trying.
An hour?
Yeah, wait, 24 hours later of like continual work, I had something that kind of looked like a graphing calculator. That's kind of where the thoughts come from. There's this good philosophy of trying to take a toolkit that doesn't have many options and make it as versatile as you possibly can, even if you're never going to use it. Thank you all for listening again.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but that's insane. Like, I don't know. As a student who's taught Deco 1100 and has taught good practices with CSS, I both cry and marvel at this. It's just amazing. Anyway, also for the record, Isaac is not a computer science student. Isaac is a math student. So props on him for also learning the ways to computer science.
Hence my horrible coding abilities in CSS, as you've seen by my practices.
We saw those free space indents. We don't like that. I'll have a vote to pick with you later. But thank you very much, Isaac, for the talk. Much appreciated. As I mentioned before, we will be back next week with some. I don't want to call it better CSS because it's just different CSS. But different CSS next week by Elias. Like I said, HFN tickets are out for week 7 as well. Definitely check that out. If you don't know what HFN is, see me afterwards. That includes you live stream, or you can hide in the chat or something, I don't know. Yeah, thank you very much, guys. Pizza is ready. Pizza is ready outside. Enjoy the rest of your nights. Thank you.
Only been there 6 months.
That was so much.
Only one issue.
Sorry? That's okay. Oh well.
So you spoke to the right track, like not the camera, but I wasn't.